Welcome fans and foes, viewers and haters. I'm your raging Canadian and here's today's review. If there's one thing I'm a big fan of on YouTube, it's fan trailers. Watching people weave their image of real films into videos that let their creativity roam wild. What seems to come very seldom from these fan trailers, however, is fan films. Back on my old YouTube channel, I reviewed a fan film based on Marvel Comics superhero team known as the Avengers. Footage from the Marvel feature films such as Spider-Man, Iron Man, X-Men, and the Incredible Hulk were spliced together to give the audience the impression that all of these characters were not only interacting with each other, but working together to save the world. I like to call it perception deception. Now the film spawned a sequel, The Avengers, Rise of the Superior, where the mighty superheroes massed together once again with new faces on the sides of good and evil. The plot involves Iron Man, Wolverine, Spider-Man, Hulk, Mr. Fantastic, and the Human Torch facing the threat of an alien invasion started after a black symbiote binds itself to Peter's costume and begins to show a darker side of himself. Sounding familiar yet? Meanwhile, a newly escaped Magneto has joined forces with Otto Octavius to build a destructive machine connected with the invasion. All the while that happens, William Stryker crosses paths with Wolverine, which leads him to gain interest in Bruce Banner and his alter ego, the Hulk. Since the film is made up of footage from other feature films, I can't exactly review the movie when it comes to acting, choice of characters, or script, since the people behind the movie can only mesh with so much and have it make sense in the end. Firstly, I will say that the editing in this film was very impressive. Even scenes of the smallest digital detail were put in to help provide the illusion that everyone in this world is capable of speaking, touching, and in some cases, brawling with each other. There were good uses of transition in both the pacing of the story and video editing, leading to some very interesting introductions to the characters from the last film. For instance, the scene where we first see Magneto was actually footage taken from the end of the first X-Men movie, yet the use of only seeing his hands and hearing his voice totally worked as an introduction scene as well. With this connected story also comes some story arcs that seem to generally work with the personalities of these characters. For instance, Wolverine shows a lot of relatable scenes with Bruce Banner, because really, both of them are loners for their own individual reasons. Scenes spliced together of Peter Parker and Johnny Storm were also well chosen, because both of them are comedic teenagers, but at heart, they're still people who want to prove themselves to the people around them. Much of the footage used in this movie was wisely chosen as well. Since much of the Incredible Hulk was used up in the last film, Ang Lee's Hulk was used here to fill in some of the open gaps in scenes, with many of them fitting well into what the movie was trying to imply. The use of a ticking clock was also a good way to build up the tension, but it could have been used a bit more, just to give the audience a sense that time is running out. The music was very nicely put together, with almost all of the songs fitting appropriately into the scenes they were given. The only problem is, the score doesn't have a lot of consistency to it when it comes to style, such as having stuff like Nickelback, then Linkin Park, then Steve Jablonsky. Though that isn't to say stuff like Nickelback didn't help soften the blow of watching Peter Parker dancing in the streets. Unfortunately though, not everything can be perfect when it comes to filmmaking, even for some of the best in Hollywood. So let's inspect Rise of the Superior's flaws. When it came to a small handful of locations, it was more evident that they weren't the places the captions implied them to be. For instance, the scene where we can see a meteorite crashing in what's supposedly Qatar, you can clearly see the Egyptian pyramids in the background. In terms of story, though there was a lot of connection between the characters, there was also a lot of important things that weren't entirely specified. For instance, Wolverine seems to recognize Stryker when we first see them meet, yet he also shows a recurring story arc that seems to heavily imply his amnesia. The villains also took quite some time to be introduced into the story of the film. Magneto and Doc Ock took quite a while to be introduced, and the introduction of Otto Octavius' character seemed to be rushed with the origins of his Doc Ock persona. One of the main things I was a little confused about was the purpose of the machine that Magneto and Doc Ock were creating. I was slightly uncertain as to whether it had any involvement in trying to stop the aliens, or if it was just a lab experiment that the two were trying to do. I admit that the use of Doc Ock's machine from Spider-Man 2 and Magneto's machine from X-Men was a clever pairing, but the one thing I thought could have provided more connection was to either digitally shade Doc Ock's machine white or shade Magneto's machine orange, just so we had the contrast of color taken out. The Avengers Rise of the Superior was an incredibly edited film with an interesting story to draw in all of its characters and venture deeper into the unexplored gaps of the Marvel Universe. My rating for Rise of the Superior is a 6 out of 10.